All right, we're at session 2, guys. I am very happy to introduce our moderators for this session, Dr. Emily Fairfax and Dr. Chris Jordan. All right, I need quiet, guys. Woohoo! All right. This session is called Revitalizing Riverscapes with Beavers, Partnership, Compromise, or Power Struggle. I'm turning it over to our moderators. Thank you.
Everybody, welcome to our panel discussion. I'm Chris Jordan. I'm a riverscape ecologist with NOAA Fisheries, the Science Center out of Corvallis, Oregon, and my fellow moderator.
Hi everyone, I'm Emily Fairfax, assistant professor at the University of Minnesota. Many of you heard from me yesterday talking about beavers and wildfire, but the plot twist is today that I'm not actually doing most of the talking. I'm instead making space and calling on my colleagues to provide their perspectives on our panel. So I want to start off with some assumptions that we're going to be making going into this panel. And the point of this slide is to let you know where we're coming from. It's not actually a discussion slide. So we are just going to go ahead and assume that riverscapes across the country are pretty degraded. And when I say pretty degraded, I mean like it's not good. There's a lot of work to be done. Additionally, we are going to assume that healthy riverscapes provide multiple benefits to both people and nature. We're not just going to focus on the ecosystems. We're not just going to focus on the people. We're focusing on both. Additionally, beavers are critical to accelerating the repair of these riverscapes, especially here in the Colorado River Basin, but in many places across North America and beyond. We know that human-beaver conflicts are going to arise, and we did put conflicts in quotation marks there, and that's part of the panel discussion, so I'm not going to go too far into that one. And then finally, we do have enough science to act. And I am saying this as a scientist, knowing that if I say that too strongly, I put myself out of a job. But we do have quite a bit of science out there, and it's not necessary for us to complete the science before acting because it's impossible to complete the science. That's the definition of science. It's always growing, always adapting, always going forwards. So I'm going to pass it off to my co-moderator, Chris, to talk to us a little bit about riverscapes.
So we have heard in the all day yesterday about the scale of degradation of riverscapes. Historic beaver management, land and water management, how that's disrupted riverscapes, disconnected, dried the floodplains. You heard Ellen and Emily start the day off telling us how bad it is. So I think we have to have these honest conversations about the fact that we have changed the scope and scale and function of riverscapes, and we as a society suffer from that. And we have some hard choices to make about how we're going to act, what we're going to do about that. And we've seen other examples. We've seen that with control of top predators, sort of cascading effects of changing trophic dynamics. We've seen that with forest management, and these have resulted in changes of ecosystems, and that we are suffering the consequences of those with and without climate change. And so with this panel, we want to talk about that transformation that's necessary within our society, within our culture, to have those hard conversations, to make those choices, to change how we interact with our degraded riverscapes and how we move them to healthy, functional riverscapes that we all can benefit, us and beaver. And so with this panel, we want to explore, what does it really mean to partner? What does it mean to compromise within our society and with nature? We want to talk about how our values intersect with that process. What baggage, in a sense, do we bring with us as we enter into our daily work? And lastly, we want to look at these dynamics across a continuum of land use, because not every solution is going to be the same, either geographically across the continent and also to the extent and the magnitude to which we are currently occupying land and water. So to start off, I'd like the panelists to introduce themselves.
And we are going to start off with our wonderful panelist, Elyssa.
Thank you so much. Hi all, I'm Elyssa Kerr. I'm the executive director of Beavers Northwest, based in the Puget Sound region of Washington. And I am a coexistence practitioner, first and foremost, so I do a lot of work helping landowners live with beavers. living in the Puget Sound region, it's very urban. We work with a lot of, landowners in this urban, exurban, suburban environments. So we're dealing with really highly modified, very, very degraded riverscapes, right, that are constrained by these human modifications and human infrastructure. And one of my kind of aha moments, can I share that?
Yes, please.
Thank you. My aha moment in my beaver world was, often when I'm encountering these private landowners, they are calling us and saying, oh my gosh, I've got beavers on the landscape and this is a big change and it never used to look like this. My stream has never looked like this before and I just want it back to that 2-foot wide straightened ditch that I had. And I think that perception that people have of their riverscapes in these highly modified ecosystems is wrong, right? We don't know what a healthy stream looks like because we've never seen one. All we've seen is these highly modified systems. And then when a beaver moves in, oh my gosh, now it's a nasty swamp, right? And these are things I hear frequently. And so I think that perception of healthy riverscapes, is skewed, certainly.
Awesome. Thank you, Elyssa. Next, I would like to have Jordan introduce herself.
Hi, I'm Jordan Kennedy. I'm a research fellow at Outer Coast College in Sitka, Alaska. And I did my PhD studying how beavers build. And I got into it because I was working with a scientist who was very interested in the biomechanics of birds' nests. And so I had this vision that I was going to answer the same question about beaver dams, and I had a plan, and I got a drone, and I was going to make a map of it. And I got up in the air, and I looked down, and I decided the beaver dams weren't all that interesting, and it was the beaver complex that was fascinating. And my aha moment was that beavers build a lot more than just dams.
They certainly do. Alden, you're up next.
Yeah, hey. So I'm Alden Shallcross. I'm the technical restoration lead at the Bureau of Land Management's National Operations Center. My primary role is really to help our field offices restore as many miles and acres of riverscape as possible. And we really needed a lot of federal lands, and federal riverscapes have been impacted by a legacy of effects that really even predate our organization. If I were to contextualize a single aha moment, I kind of struggled with that because it's kind of hard to land where you are in your career without a few of them. In this context, I would put it back to when I was doing an environmental assessment for a multi-state area, and I had to contextualize the conditions of our riverscapes and the opportunities that existed for restoration in them. And I found a lot of systems that look like this, where we have large inactive valley bottoms in the riparian wetland aquatic area, depicted here as the active channel and the active floodplain. We're just a small relic of it. But when you compared that to the assessment results, they were suggesting that these are maybe functioning at risk or proper functioning on the low end. And it struck me that we had just a total disconnect between what's possible. We'd really been underestimating the potential of these systems, and that we have so much more that we can do than we have been.
Awesome. Thank you, Alden. And then last but not least, Amy.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Amy McNamara. I'm a freshwater ecosystem strategist at Natural Resource Defense Council. I've lived and worked in Montana for the last 20 years, and I have the privilege of advocating for beaver restoration and riverscape health on public lands. And my aha moment is that, or was that, if we're going to address the scope of degradation that we face, that we really do have to partner with beavers. And just Emily and Chris have both said like how the level of degradation is really high, but I want to put some numbers to that. So the Bureau of Land Management, in the lower 48, only 16% of their floodplain acres are considered healthy, connected, and active. Only 16%. So we have a lot of work to do, but I'm an optimist, and I like to think about that through the lens of there's a lot of opportunity for recovery. So, but if we're going to start to chip away at what's needed, we really do need to partner with beavers. And I just want to give a shout out to Mark Beardsley, who I hope is in the audience somewhere. These are his photos of the restoration work that his team has been doing, some of the restoration work his team has been doing in Colorado. And on the left is pre-restoration, and on the right is a little over a year later, and what can happen when beavers who are upstream or downstream move into the system and take over the good work that he and his team are doing.
Great, thank you, Amy. Chris, what's your aha moment?
Well, I think my aha moment happened in a conversation with the project managers around the Bridge Creek Restoration Project, where we started messing with the stream in Central Oregon, and we had dramatic success or changes as what we were doing, and we were arguing with each other whether the success or the changes were because of we were managing sediment, or we were managing vegetation, or we were managing beaver. And I think my aha moment was realizing the answer is yes. And that mess, all of those things together, is what a healthy, functional riverscape looks like, and we have to enter it in that conversation thinking about all of those things simultaneously.
And I'll just say, I think my aha moment is maybe a little more basic than some of my colleagues. I was studying physics and working as a camp counselor, leading canoe trips in northern Minnesota. And for the first time, I had to drag my canoe over a gigantic beaver dam. And I'm already tired from out there portaging and everything, and I see the size of this dam, and I realize it's holding back an entire lake. And then there's like 40 more ahead of me over the next week. And I'm like, there's something out there that's very powerful, because I couldn't build these, and I can barely get my canoe over these, and this rodent needs a little bit more attention. So those are our aha moments. They range quite a bit from our different perspectives and the careers we've had. I want to take us back just a small step and to talk for a second about beavers, and then we're going to talk a little bit about the Healthy Riverscapes Continuum and how we get people on board with that. So, probably preaching to the choir, a phrase you're going to hear every single day this conference. There used to be a lot more beavers here. And today, this population is rebounding, but it's still very significantly below what it was historically. We're looking at maybe 5 to 15 million, up to 30 if you're optimistic across North America, but that's like 5 to 10% of their historic population. So there's a lot of space for them to come back in theory. However, land has also changed a lot in that time, and our investments in the land and our need to thrive on this land is not something that we can ignore. So there's this continuum. There's this space for beavers in theory, and then there's this space for us in theory, and figuring out how we live side by the giant rodent that thwarts me in the boundary waters, that's going to take some conversations, some power struggles, and probably some compromises. And getting other people on board with that is not necessarily super straightforward.
So getting people on board with that is actually a practice. It's actually a science. In the early 60s, Everett Rogers introduced this idea, this diffusion of innovation. And folks have probably seen this around technology, around culture, and it's any group of people being confronted with a new idea, either a new tool, a new toy, or a cultural change. And society responds, this group of people respond in a predictable fashion. On the left-hand side, you have those big thinkers, the ones who jump on those ideas early, those innovators, or they came up with the idea. And you have some folks who are maybe risk-averse, the squirrel brains, of like, oh, look, another shiny object. And they want to jump on that. And then you have the majority. They're cynics, they're practical, a little staid, maybe a little scared of change. And if you have a left-hand tail, you have a right-hand tail. And so the laggards are just obstinate, right? And why do we care about this? Well, everything that all of you are talking about, right? You are the innovators and you are the early adopters. But what you're asking, and what we're all asking, is for society at large to take on the ideas, the things that we have heard over the last day and a half. And to do that, we have to jump this chasm. We have to get to the tipping point where this idea can penetrate into the practical, risk-scared majority. And ideas aren't sticky. Our ideas won't translate until we get 15, 20% of the population advocating for those ideas, and that's what will push it into the majority. So that's what our job is. And what I want to do now is go one by one through the panel, and using this lens of the diffusion of innovation, where are you, and where is your community that you work in on this adoption curve with the idea that riverscapes are degraded, riverscapes can be repaired, and beaver and these natural processes that we've heard about are our route to that. And so I'd like to start with Jordan.
I grew up at the Blackfeet Indian Reservation, where the Blackfeet are the holders of the beaver bundle. The bundle is the oldest of the kind that the Blackfeet hold, and the bundle is basically how we transfer our knowledge from one generation to the next. The beaver is also one of the fundamental animals of creation, and I decided to do my thesis work on the Blackfeet Reservation, where I don't think my thesis project could have been done anywhere else, just due to the encouragement that I got from the tribe in order to study the beaver in this habitat.
Great, thank you. Amy.
All right, so as a policy advocate, my job is to think about the enabling conditions that we need to have in place for the many of you who are in this audience and actually get to do the day-to-day exciting work of restoring beavers and riverscape health on the ground. So that means that I think about the policy frameworks, the funding pathways, and the programs that need to exist to support beaver restoration and riverscape health. And one of the things that I've discovered in doing this advocacy is that we really face a stumbling block in the language that we use. So our society really thinks about streams in a very narrow way. And that's literally. You go out there on the landscape and you tend to see single channel streams. And this is what we all are sort of raised to think is healthy. If you look at textbooks, you have single channel streams in them. And it's this thinking that we've really lost something is something that we're trying to share and to get across to folks. And by using narrowing language, we're really focused on what is left of our riverscapes. So stream channels or narrow riparian corridors. And we leave behind in that language the riverine wetlands and the multi-threaded channels and the lush vegetation and the wetted floodplains. And so as we really try to advocate or talk to folks about why we need to restore these and the benefits that come with them, the challenge we face in getting over this chasm is that we need to really help people think about the possibilities that these systems can provide. And a narrow stream channel isn't going to be a fire risk policy strategy, but a healthy riverscape is. And until we can get our decision makers and more people thinking about riverscapes more broadly, we're really going to be challenged to get over the chasm.
Great, thank you. And so that just gives you some examples of the differences in the communication and the different settings, these different groups of people that these ideas still apply to. Alden.
Yeah, so in the BLM, I'd say that most folks are early adopters. It's a growing group, but we've largely staffed to minimize and avoid impacts from authorized uses and being proactive in addressing historical and legacy impacts is kind of a new thing. And I think that moving forward, we're going to need at least two things to occur. One is a paradigm shift that really is about how we view and see our riverscapes and what's necessary for them to function appropriately. And for that to be operationalized, and by that I mean it to make its way into the policies and to the practices such as the monitoring that we're doing that's defining the filters through which we're viewing our systems. And that's, I think, going to make a big step forward, and we're making progress there. But the next part is, I think, mentoring and education, that when it comes time to doing, we need professionals to do that. It takes a lot to, we can teach people how to do a BDA and how to do a POW and how to do a vegetation planting, but reading the historical context of your stream and its evolutionary context and the sequence of events that need to occur for recovery and at what point beaver might be appropriate, that takes insight, and I think that not a lot of that is coming from educational backgrounds. Some folks are getting it, and that's great, but us as agencies and other organizations have a role to play in filling that gap, and I think there's a lot we can do there. doing an initial project can be daunting. It can be a real example of you succeeding or maybe having a visible failure on the landscape. And we shouldn't put people out there alone in their first times to do that. I think having somebody to mentor them and to for them to follow behind and ask questions with is really critical. We're making progress in that realm. We have, just this year alone, developed with NRCS a federal series of trainings on riverscape health and process-based restoration. We've also hosted 2 field-based workshops with target a different audience, those who might be range conservationists or wildlife biologists who need to see that these systems can be truly valuable in a different way than maybe they have considered. They might be funding projects or participating on ID teams to do land health evaluations, but they don't necessarily need to go to the extent of doing the designs and the implementation. And so I think that we're making great strides, and I hope that we can continue in that direction.
Okay, you heard it here. The U.S. government is a thought leader, is an innovator. Elyssa.
Yeah, thanks. I do think we do a lot of coexistence work with municipalities and agencies, and the thing that I see the best success is when there is a champion within one of those agencies or municipalities, someone who is willing to adapt to and coexist with beavers, which is not an easy task, right? You need someone who is on the early end of this curve, ready to put the work in and help convince their colleagues that that's worthwhile. And certainly, I think my work is a little bit skewed. We receive requests from people looking for technical assistance when beavers move into their property, but they're calling us only when they're looking for an alternative to lethal removal, right? They've already decided, I want to do something different here. Maybe it's because they read Eager or saw the documentary Beaver Believers or heard Dr. Fairfax speak once. But these people come to us with some idea already of this is something I want to try. So I think certainly a lot of my work is kind of skewed towards those early adopters, innovators. But each successful project that we do is an example that helps to show other people that this is a reasonable path forward. And we do a lot of installations in parks and public spaces, and those get seen by a lot of people. And I think the outreach and education that goes alongside that, we lead nature walks to have the general public come out and meet their neighborhood beavers and see these coexistence devices in action. And that's a method to kind of help us keep jump-starting this and get more and more folks involved in coexistence and accepting beavers and healthy riverscapes.
Great, thank you, Elyssa. And I was at a conference with Elyssa back in April, I think, in Albuquerque, and we were walking and chatting about 100 different things, but I was really struck by just how many stories and sort of examples she was able to share with me from her work. And so I thought it would be good for us as we talk about expanding our solution sets and thinking about different ways to compromise or get into a power fight with beavers, if we gave you some concrete examples. And I fully recognize that concrete is not something we're usually talking about at conferences like this, but at least in the case of examples, it's a word that I'm going to continue to use. So we have some scenarios, and we're going to ask our panelists to select one of these, maybe a second one if they feel like it, and sort of reflect on it and give their approach to how they would deal with one of these challenges that we often see with beavers. So scenario 1 is that beavers set up shop along a train track. A lot of us have dealt with coex in urban environments where maybe the solution is pretty clear or you could move some infrastructure. I would love to hear the success stories of people moving trains. Scenario 2 is a fire-prone watershed. This one is near and dear to me. Thinking about droughts, thinking about the futures of fire. How do you manage beavers in these landscapes knowing that there's not a whole lot of time for you to make decisions that could have a really big impact? Scenario 3 is about prolonged drought. So as we see climate changing, as we see these increased dry periods, what do we actually do with that? And how do we make sure that what we're doing is not going to go and harm the beavers that we're working so hard to partner with? And then scenario 4, riverscape health for multi-benefit management. How do we maybe open our minds up just a hair and think about all of the other things that we get out of these sort of restoration endeavors and not so hyper-focus on the beaver itself? And so I know our panelists have a lot of different experiences, but Elyssa, would you like to start us off talking about the train?
Yeah, how'd you know that's what I'd talk about? Definitely. So as a coexistence practitioner, I've really started to think about my role not as managing beavers, but instead managing people and really being a human beaver therapist, right? I am representing the beavers in this scenario, trying to build better relationships between people and beavers. And one of the things that I've really come to notice on a lot of these site visits I go on with people is that there really is a real versus a perceived conflict. Many people call us and they say, beavers moved in, help me, help me, help me. And it's like, cool, what's the impact? What's happening here? It's like, well, it's just different, right? And so thinking about a railroad scenario, the way I would approach something like this is to assess what is the real impact here. Are beavers just living alongside a rail line and that's okay? Or is there a threat to flooding that rail line that could be a major problem that we need to intervene and do coexistence work on? So this is really interfacing with those people managing this land, managing this rail line, and understanding what is the conflict here? What is the impact, the true impact? And do we have room for compromise with beavers? Because the reality is our human infrastructure is here, and Emily's right, we can't move a rail line readily, right? Maybe we could move a wood pile that's being flooded, but moving a rail line is really tough. And so, really thinking about these coexistence projects as a compromise. Our human-modified ecosystems are never going to be these beautiful bastions of riverscape health that we can hold up and be like, wow, look at how wonderful we made this, right? But we can make incremental increases in health by allowing beavers to stay, by implementing coexistence devices and allowing a wetland to stay in that small area without impacting that infrastructure. So it's, we're never gonna get that big fire resilience in our human-modified urban ecosystems, but we can have these little habitat corridors. We can have, water quality benefits that are coming from this coexistence compromise. And so really, to me, it's that incremental benefits are still really important because not all of our riverscapes are going to return to these beautiful, wild, healthy systems that are, the ultimate glory that we want. So taking those incremental steps is important too.
Thanks for that, Elyssa. A little bit of a bummer that we can't just convince the beavers to drive the trains. I'm pretty sure that's where the term engineer comes from, and they are nature's engineers. But maybe that's a goal for BeaverCon 2026, is get some updates on beavers driving trains. Jordan, I think you might also have some things to share, perhaps about our first scenario.
Yeah, so I think about beavers in terms of behavior. And so what I would ask is, what is it about any one of these environments that the beaver's attracted to? So if I wanted to remove the beaver from the train, I would ask, what is it that I can remove that would discourage beavers from building there in the first place? Or if I wanted beaver in a fire-prone watershed, I would ask myself, how can I modify this environment in such a way that it encourages beavers to colonize here?
Yeah, that's great. I think about that a lot. We think about our own behaviors. Some of us are good at controlling our own behaviors, but beavers have behaviors and they're making decisions, and we can absolutely work on the landscape in ways to modify those behaviors. And Jordan brings up a really good point. Like, sometimes we do want them there, and maybe we also want the train there. Is there a way to use their behaviors to get the best of both worlds? Speaking of fires and droughts, Amy, you and I have had quite a few conversations about fires and droughts and beavers, and they're all very wonderful. So I'm kind of wondering about your thoughts on these scenarios.
Yeah, so I do think a lot about fires and droughts because that's what people in the West are worried about, and that's what decision makers hear about from their constituents. And so I really appreciated Wade Crowfoot's all of his comments yesterday, but specifically he said that we need innovative and inspiring solutions to address the challenges we face, and I couldn't agree more. And 2 weeks ago, I was in a meeting with staff from the Western Governors Association, and I was in that meeting with Emily and several other advocates who I believe are in the room this morning, and we had the opportunity to talk to them about the role that beavers play in wildfire, building wildfire resilience, and addressing the challenges we face with drought. And it was really, actually, the start of the conversation was great because there was a handful of staff, and for those who don't know, the Western Governors Association, they worked to identify bipartisan solutions that address the challenges that states in the West are facing and that governors and their staffs and administrations can advance. And this was a late afternoon meeting, and they came in and were sharing how all day they had been talking about how they got to speak with the beaver folks in the afternoon, and they were excited to do that. And Wade also said yesterday that we need to build a movement for beavers. And the way we build it, I'm an organizer. That's how I started my career. But one of the things that I was taught was you think about the self-interest that others have in the things that you care about. And that's how you move people along that adoption curve. And, when we heard from the ranchers yesterday afternoon, they were talking about their self-interest and how they connect with beavers. And we're hearing we have a lot of innovation, a lot of early adopters, and our job now is to demonstrate the benefits to policymakers so they can see that it's in their self-interest to protect beavers to benefit wildfire resilience and drought.
Well spoken as always, Amy. Thank you. And then, Alden, I know you have a little bit different perspective and maybe some higher level thoughts on riverscape health in general.
Yeah, sure. I said earlier that one of my main objectives is helping our organization restore as many miles and acres of riverscape as possible. And that speaks of this broad understanding of a connection that when riverscapes have the things they need, when they have more processes engaged across more land, they tend to produce the values that we all care about. But the reality is we have a lot of programs in large organizations and between organizations that have goals and objectives that are tied to specific values, and they get funding for those values. So the wildfire program may care about making our landscapes more resilient to wildfires or protecting wild and urban interfaces and having buffers. The wildlife program may be in search of improving habitat values or connectivity and migration corridors. The same thing goes for water quality agencies and groups. The more that we can speak to and offer opportunities through Riverscape Health and Restoration to these groups, I think the more we're able to partner with them and leverage the availability of resources to do this kind of work. In my experience and in my career, I've funded probably, certainly more projects through external groups. So I work within the Aquatic Resources Program, and I'd say through sage grouse, through threatened and endangered species programs, and through wildlife programs, I've probably funded more than 2 to 3 times the number of projects by helping them see the value and the connections between Riverscape Health, the projects and things they care about, identifying opportunities on the landscape that match with their interests, and then offering solutions and partnerships. And I think the more that we can do that, the more good we'll be able to do across more landscape.
All right, thank you, panelists, for taking on the scenarios. Reflecting back when we put together the proposal to do this panel, we said we wanted to be provocative, be controversial. I don't think we have. I think we've tried, and maybe what these folks have said in different audiences might have seemed controversial, might have seemed provocative. But if we are all on the left-hand side of the innovation curve, if we are the innovators and the sort of the thought leaders, then we are speaking to each other. We are speaking to the choir. And so I would like it open up now to Q&A to hear from all of you and pose questions to the audience. What have you heard? What are the solutions? What are our effective ways forward? How do we, as the source of the sticky ideas, have the tipping point event to move on? And so we have Q&A that's entered through the app. And we are going to let folks ask questions, and our panelists have the option to respond.
Okay, so we do have some questions on the app, and I see someone in the audience I'll try to get to in a minute. And I'm trying to stick with the theme as much as possible because some of these questions are really interesting, but here's one. As we navigate the chasm, how important do you see it is, or is it, to communicate realistic expectations of partnering with beavers? Sorry, another one just came in. Do you see beaver-related solutions being oversold with a possible negative impact on the majority's view of beaver systems?
Can you repeat the first question? I'm going to address that one.
As we navigate the chasm, How important do you see it is to communicate realistic expectations of partnering with beavers?
I think it's essential that we are realistic about what can be achieved. We all run on our own credibility when we do this work, and if we can't be trusted resources for information, then we're not going to be resources at all. And I actually love cycling, and if you think about the Tour de France, which is a over 2,000-mile race, the folks who win that race win it because they are working on incremental ways of reducing the time. So they've got fancy helmets, they've got they've got clothing that sheds the wind, they eat in certain ways, et cetera, et cetera. And as we address climate change, we have to be doing the same thing, right? Beavers can't solve it, but if we think about building efficiency and transportation and beavers and using less water, and all of those solutions together will move us in the direction we need to go. And beavers are part of the solution. They are not the only solution, so I think it's absolutely critical.
Okay, this question got a lot of votes.
So when communicating about expectations of beavers, one thing that I don't think is talked about is not all beaver damming complexes are made equal. Beaver damming complexes are multi-generational structures, and they take many, many generations of beavers building in order to really reach their full structural capacity. So early generations of beaver damming complexes might have a series of dams that are impossible for fish to pass, but age damming complex is interconnected with canals that fish will have no problem navigating through. And so when thinking about these structures, like, it doesn't happen overnight, especially the benefits that we want to see.
Okay, Elyssa, what is the biggest lesson city managers can learn or practice to live in coexistence with beavers? This question got a lot of upvotes.
Great. You have to be adaptive. Number one, you cannot set a coexistence device and forget about it and assume that your problem is solved. And I think city managers, I think it's really hard. Nobody likes maintenance. Nobody likes, coming back and having to think about things over and over again. But realistically, that is going to be cheaper in the long run. It's going to be easier in the long run. But it has to be adaptive. It is not something, and I think that's, tacking on to the last question, coexistence devices, I have seen them installed poorly by people that just saw a picture of a pond leveler and were like, I could throw a pipe in a stream. Cool, cool, cool. And then that gives them a bad rap, right? So I think more and more I'm advocating for better trainings, doing the Beaver Core program, working with existing coexistence practitioners to better understand how these things work, and recognizing the adaptive nature of working with beavers, right? They're wild animals with their own agency, and we can't prescribe our own, thoughts on what they're gonna do. We can do our best to predict and play with them and see if we can find a compromise that works for us and them.
Good news, we have a controversial question. Where do you see lethal trappers fitting into the mix of restoring rivers to benefit all stakeholders, beavers, riverscapes, and humans? And there was another, actually a similar question about lethal trapping on public lands. I'm looking to find it, I'm sorry.
I'll do a brief thing here. It's not as much about restoring riverscapes because, like I said, we're talking about incremental benefits in urban landscapes. But I see lethal removal of beavers as a tool. It has to happen sometimes in our urban systems. There are places that cannot support beavers because of the way we as humans have modified those ecosystems. So thinking about nuisance control of beavers, right, that happens. And I think it's a tool that will continue. Given how highly we as humans have modified our ecosystems. There are places where it's just hard to support beavers, certainly.
Okay, for Alden, what new opportunities does the new BLM public lands rule offer for beaver restoration at scale? What are the agency's barriers to this, and how do we lower them?
Well, thanks for that question. We're in the process of sorting through and figuring all this out. I'll put a few ideas out there. One is that we have a mandate under that public lands rule to do these watershed condition assessments, which are going to provide insight to both issues and opportunities, because one of the required outcomes is input to restoration plans. And it also includes a requirement to consider ecological processes. And I think that that is one of the key things that we've largely overlooked in the past, this biological component, the importance of beaver dam building activity to a lot of the systems that we are managing. We also have a new policy, a program manual that went out this year that really encapsulated and incorporated the principles of riverscape health. So included with that is the importance of lateral connectivity across the valley bottom, not just longitudinal. The importance of structural elements, such as beaver dam building activity and wood accumulations. I think that the devil's in the details in how we incorporate this. What I would anticipate is that as we do these broad reviews with a consistent approach, at the watershed scale, but also the granularity of stream reaches, we're going to find kind of hot spots and opportunities to make our investments. In the past, there's been a tendency to focus on the data that we had and therefore go to streams where we had walked before and largely avoid comparing the opportunities that we had assessed to the rest that are out there in the area. I think when we have to be in the position of comparing and contrasting this stream to that opportunity, this opportunity, that opportunity, it's going to lead us down the pathway of identifying those areas where we can produce the greatest return on investment, where the risks are lowest. And I think that there's so much low-hanging fruit out there that for the foreseeable future, there's going to be abundant opportunities for us to work at larger scales than we have in the past, beyond the reach and typical project scale, 20, 30, 40, 50 plus miles within these Huck 10 watersheds.
Do you have any experience or tips for addressing fears that beavers will negatively impact water rights in arid landscapes?
I mean, we have a lot of scientists in here, and people have talked about it in here too. Allaying fears is a tough thing. The best we can do is point to the evidence that we have and the logic that we have. To date, a lot of what it has shown, the information that we have suggests that we can tend to have effects in short time scales. So when we recover the initial storage that had been lost, when we remove the plugs, we got incision and you restore that, there's a time period where you have, from the order of hours to days typically, where you're recharging that storage. But in the long run, it seems to suggest that we were mostly affecting the treatment area. Once you get below that treatment area, most of the changes have been hard to measure. I think it's going to take really expensive and longer-term studies to instrument and understand that. So maybe talking in the perspective of the scale and magnitude that we might expect. So yeah, there might be more ET, there might be these other factors, but putting some relative bounds on our uncertainty, comparing that to some other measurements that they might be familiar with. I'm going to stop short of pulling out some other measurement, but putting it in contrast of an amount they may know, acre feet, et cetera.
Okay, what are the primary research needs to support the advancement of beaver and riverscape restoration?
I am not a panelist. I would like to selfishly hear from all of our panelists on this one so I can get ideas for my next papers.
I think that one of the things that we commonly talk about in the field is you need to think like a beaver. What that means, it makes a lot of sense to people that have been doing this work and observing beaver, but I don't think it's been fully documented. So what are the things that beaver are cluing into? What are their order of operations? How are they evaluating a site, and how would they go approach restoring it. If we're trying to mimic, promote, and sustain, for example, some cases we can just get really lucky by just putting structure and not putting a lot of thought into it. But I think that we can probably do better, and better understanding how and why beaver are doing this would help us become better practitioners.
I'll take a stab at this. I was actually really excited yesterday to hear Ellen Wool say that one of the things that she's looking at and her team is looking at is when we're going to make choices about investing in beads, where should we be doing that? And she's looking at whether or not we should be investing in our headwater streams or somewhere else in the system. And I think that that's a really important question to be asking, because we have limited dollars to work with, and so we need to be making the best choices possible. And we really do depend on good science and good thinkers, and I'm really excited for what Ellen and her team will be learning and sharing out with us so we can be making good decisions about the resources we have.
For me, as a coexistence practitioner, I always need more data about coexistence devices. There's not a lot out there. People ask a lot of questions. How are they changing, maintaining our ecosystems, the hydrology, the biology, everything, right? I get a lot of questions about fish passage. We had a whole session on it yesterday that hopefully you saw. And I think just coexistence devices in general need a little more attention in our beaver world, too.
So I came at beavers from a systems perspective. I was never actually interested in beavers as an animal when I first got started in this work. I just thought it was a fascinating system to study. And so I suppose taking maybe a higher level approach is I just have a general question for how many beavers can our waterways actually hold? And what would that mean in terms of a theoretical exercise, in terms of habitat connectivity, carbon sequestration, biodiversity, and having some baseline to justify why you would even want to reintroduce beavers back into areas to people that don't really care about beavers, or it doesn't matter to them, but just making the case from a numbers standpoint.
Okay, what motions are underway to integrate other landscape restoration, such as forest thinning, pollination, water quality improvements, grazing, invasive species, et cetera, with riverscape restoration? Is it plausible to expand those synergies? How can we bring more land managers into our castor cult?
I'll say one exciting one that I find is GPS collaring for livestock. In the past, we all know that there's an array of contributing factors to impairment, and there's no doubt that in places, riparian grazing management is certainly one of them. And traditionally, the approach has been off-site water, fencing projects that are hard to maintain, they're really expensive, they have other adverse impacts. It seems promising that we would have opportunities to control the herd and grazing behavior, the processes of ungulate browse, through a new tool and technique. And I think in many cases where we can address the root cause of problems, whether that's structural starvation and the loss of beaver and degradation that's occurred because of that, plus a combined effect of livestock grazing browse on an already impaired or sensitive system, could really help us advance and accelerate recovery.
You have a question from the audience. I mean, I can add some, but what
I'm just wondering, does anyone else have an answer, or shall we ask our next question? Okay.
Well, my question refers to scale. I mean, it seems like this is a very, very slow introduction process to get beavers here and there. And in order to get this done in time, because I don't think we have a lot of time left, if I look at forests being destroyed, and we need these beavers, and I wonder, is there a way maybe to work with landscape people, landscape architects, who have a tendency to be able to deal with regular populations, people like me, you know, who have a house. I'm never going to have a beaver in my pond, although I would love one, but I live in the city of Denver. So getting these ideas to a greater community, and maybe this is a question for the coexistence people, because in Logan, Utah, I guess Walmart has said, we'll keep some beavers here. There's a place in California that has a beaver celebration every year. And the more people that look at beavers and say, oh, wow, we had no idea. I mean, you ask them to draw a stream, they'll draw a straight line. And so this is where I feel that, you know, getting out of the silo of academia, perhaps, and getting out there into the community somehow will get better support from the voter and from the politicians.
So you're kind of asking how we're going to get over the chasm. How do we get over the chasm, guys?
Yeah, and somebody that's on the right of that, you know, the Luddite that doesn't use the app. You know, we want to know.
Well, I'll tackle that part of it really quickly. In getting over the chasm, you don't focus on the Luddites. We have to leave them. We have to even leave the late adopters. So our job now is to take the innovations, the stories from the innovations, and figuring out how we connect them to things that people care about. And this is a great 3 days of innovation and adaptation and early adoption. And our job is to make those connections to the things that people care about, whether they're policymakers or whoever else is that you're speaking to, and really focusing on self-interest and being disciplined about thinking about the policy pathways that we have or the avenues that we have to increase beavers on the landscape.
Couldn't agree more. Yeah, I think certainly it's about taking those success stories and sharing them widely and making connections to what matters to different people, right? So when I'm talking to municipal land managers, I'm talking about cost savings, and I'm talking about water storage, right? When I'm talking to a landowner who tells me, oh my gosh, I saw otters for the first time in my pond now that there's beavers here, right? It's got enough water for them. I'm talking about all the other wildlife that might show up in that system. And, you know, it's finding that route that is important for each scenario and each person so that they catch that beaver fever, right? And they're so excited about that aspect that is important to them specifically. And I think there's so many routes, right? Beavers are amazing. There's so many intersections that beavers have with all of the different subject matter that everyone is excited about. And so finding the one that works for each individual situation is the way that we keep convincing people forward.
I think that's a great segue. We got the 2-minute warning, and so I'd like to just run down the panel, starting with Elyssa. What's the word or the sentence that you'd leave the audience with to wrap this up?
Okay, coexisting with beavers is really about helping people to understand and manufacture compromise.
Beaver futurism.
We need a paradigm shift in how we talk about healthy river corridors or riverscape health to get us over the chasm.
Action. When we start doing good work and people see it, it creates positive energy, and it's contagious.
Beaver futurism, I love it. I think we have to get over our arrogance and give agency to nature, whether it's riverscapes or beaver. As Jordan said, beaver have behavior. And so I think we need to get over ourselves and allow the natural world to be itself. And Emily, the last word.
I would say the last word that you should all hold on to is hope. And don't be ashamed to feel hopeful. It's a good thing. Be realistic, but cling to your hope because we really do need it.